In this tutorial for new Blender users, I'll show you some simple ways to help you get started in mapping some images onto your objects. And I'm using version 2.63a. And what I have here is just a couple of cylinders just with 8 sides each, so they kind of look like octagons. And seeing that I've tried 2 different approaches to putting images on them. Image mapping is actually quite complicated, and there's people who are super experts in the field. But so what I'll do is I'll start from scratch with the new file, and we'll start from there. Let me see. So we'll go new, just so you see it from the beginning. Okay, so we have the cube in the scene. I'm going to press X, get rid of that. I'll press Shift A. I'll put a plane in here just to have something in the scene. I'll press S followed by 9. That scales it immediately, just like that. And for me, I have to have a color. God, without a color, it's just not going to work for me. Alright, so I'll make this, say, a light blue or something like that. Alright, so now we have a basic scene. Now we're going to add we'll do 2 different ways. First way, we'll just add a, let's see, Shift A, and we'll add a cylinder. And then over here in the tools, this toolbar, you can change the number of vertices, so I'll drop it down to 8. Alright, so I have 8, and it's down below the surface, so I'll bring it up. I'll scale down a little bit. Something like that. And then maybe next to it, we'll put something else. Let's see. Yeah, we'll just add another one over here. I'll Shift A. I'll add another cylinder. And maybe this one I'll just have 6 sides too. Like that. And I'll scale him down a little bit as well. Alright, so I have 2 objects in the scene. I'm going to try and do 2 different things with this. Let's start with, let's see. Yeah, let's start with this one right here. In fact, let's even start simpler than that. Let's add a plane to the scene as well. Shift A, add a plane. Alright, now we have a plane in the scene. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll map an image onto this plane all by itself, nothing else. Alright, and you would think it's really straightforward to do, but it's not really easy. But it's okay. But Blender is really powerful, so it gives you a lot of flexibility. So there's a little bit of a learning curve. And the first thing we want to do is we need to add right here a material. You have to have a material, and this you can use in conjunction with a texture. So first add a material, then add a texture like this, and I'm going to say new, and I'm going to say image or movie here for the type. And I'll just leave that there for a second. Well, before you can actually map an image to the surface, you actually have to mark the seams on it, and you have to unwrap it. And I'll address this in detail as we go, as I work on these objects over here as well. But just follow me along for a moment. I'll have to tab into edit mode, and we're going to see this all again here in a moment, so don't worry if you don't quite make sense yet. And we're going to come down here, and you have to press mark seam. Alright, so I've marked all these seams that are highlighted because they're all active, and then you have to unwrap it. And so you have to press unwrap. Now when you unwrap, you have to make sure everything on the object that you want texture mapped is selected. So these are selected, so I'll press unwrap like this, and I've unwrapped the object. We don't really see anything yet, so I'm going to press T here. I'm going to grab another window just for the moment, and I'm going to make this a UV window. Alright, UV image editor, like this. And this is basically the object unwrapped. In fact, see, you noticed here I'm in edit mode. If I go over here and I turn off edit mode, you don't see this cube on here, this plane. But when I go into edit mode, you actually see that it is actually mapped to this location here. So I know I've unwrapped it like this. Alright, and so now let's go back to we're back into the material tab like this. Then I'll just go grab an image down here, and I have to get it. I actually set that as the type. It was right here as the image. Whoops, there was none. I'll go back and set it as image again, and then down here further, I'll just open an image, and I'll just go pick something from the hard drive, a directory of just, I don't even know what these are. Hotlight 2, I don't even know what it is. Okay, so it's some images I created in a paint program. Right, and you would hope that just by selecting the image it would show up on your plane, but it doesn't. So a couple things you have to do is you have to be in texture mode. So by default Blender is set to solid mode, and so I click this here and I go up into texture mode. Alright, so now it's in texture mode and we still don't see it. Well, that's because before it's rendered, if you want to look at it in this preview like this, you actually have to have your shaders set, your GLSL shaders set. There's a couple ways you can set it, but I typically go into Blender Game for the moment and click this camera icon for render, and then down here I set GLSL like this, and then I'll go back into Blender Render, and you can see now that the image is mapped onto here like this. We'll look at it from above. In fact, I'll press the DEL key to make that my centered object like that. That way I can rotate around it. And here's this is a helpful tip, is notice I tilt it like this and I have this highlight coming into it. Well, that's not what my original image looks like. My image looks more like, let's see, where did he go? Oh no, I don't have him. So my image looks more, where did my image go? I'm back in Blender Render. Oh, there he is. Let's look at it from a flat plane. Alright, so there he is right here. There's the image, and you see, notice this big highlight. Well, that's because I have a light in the scene and it's casting a reflection on it because its surface is shiny, and that's the purpose of allowing you to set a material separately from the texture. So since I'm in material mode, I'll go down here and I'm going to change the specularity down so it's not shiny anymore, and so it's down to 0. And so you'll notice when I tilt it, there's shininess on this surface, but it's no longer on here. In fact, I'll leave it like that and you can see it cranking up like that. So that's why you can change the material and the textures separately. It's very useful. Alright, so now I've mapped that image onto here. So that's just the basics. But when you get to something more complex, like this object here, there's a couple things you have to do, and you have to do the same thing. You have to actually unwrap it. You have to mark the seams and unwrap it, and I'll kind of set it up here, and then in part 2 of the video I'll go into it further. So let me just move this one out of the way a little bit, and I'll move this one over, and just for the moment let me turn this down, and I'll rotate this on X 90 degrees just for a moment. So, and in fact I'm going to rotate it on Y a little bit as well. I'm just going to rotate it so it looks kind of flat, and this is just so you kind of get an idea of what we're about to do. So to mark the seams, I'm going to go into here, and what you basically do, you're kind of opening it up like you would open up a box and laying it flat down on the ground. And in this case, in order for me to mark the seams properly with this object, I have to kind of envision, alright, what would I need to do to open this thing up so it lays flat on the surface? Alright, well, I would say everything pretty much has to be cut. So you know, imagine you're just cutting it here with a pair of scissors. So I'll go, okay, I'll take a pair of scissors, and if I cut up this edge, this, and this, and leave that there, then this little octagon shaped flap should flip open and drop down to that side like that. Alright, and then if I did the same thing on the other side, I cut those, and left that uncut, then it should flip open like that. And at the same time, what you notice, I've also would have been cutting all these edges, except for the bottom one, except for that, down here, and then this guy should flop open as well. So, but to cut it, you don't really cut it, you mark it. Alright, so you mark the seams. I don't want that to be cut, so I bring up the toolbar like this. I'm in edit mode. I have to go into edge select like this. I'm going to mark that edge right there. Alright, and then I'm going to go over here. I'm going to hold down the shift key, and I'm going to mark that edge as well like that. Alright, so I've marked those two edges like this, and then the only reason I did that because I want to press Control I and select the inverse. So what I've done is, so I didn't have to just manually select them all. So I've selected all the edges that I was talking about that we were going to cut, except those bottom two. So this should flop open like that, and that should flop open like that. And then this guy, well, theoretically, I'm probably going to have to mark, I probably don't want that edge marked either, so he flops open. So we're going to try it. I'll shift and hold this here. It's an art to unwrapping your objects and marking seams. So we're going to go with that. We'll mark the seam, And then once it's marked, remember you have to highlight everything, and then you unwrap it. Alright, so I've unwrapped it. And let me see what it did, what kind of unwrap job it did. Well, there's those two things flopped over to the side, there's those things there, and these are the other panels, but I'm not sure exactly which panel is which. Therein lies the problem with this type of editing. It's kind of tricky. Let's try it another way real quick. Let me Control Z this. Alright, I've Control Z'd it. I'm back to this, and except I'm going to put this seam back in here. Alright, so the only ones that are not cut or not marked, would not be marked, are going to be those two. I'm going to mark all the others, so I'll mark those seams, and then I'll highlight everything, and then I'll unwrap that. And let's see. So now it unwraps it a little bit differently. Alright, so when you're in here, so this is just for starters. We're going to continue the video on the next part, but for this part, you notice when you're in here, you can actually move these around in this scene, and your image, when you bring your image in, you're basically bringing in your image in, it's going to lay on top of all these objects. So you want to move these in the scene. Like for instance, I can take this and press G and move it up there. I don't want to do that, but I'm just saying you would move these around in your UV image map area, and then your image gets mapped onto this whole region like this. Alright, so what we'll continue it in the next lesson. I'm going to show you this approach with mapping, and then we'll try a kind of a simplified version of it as well, to maybe make it a little bit simpler if you just want to do some quick and easy image maps. Alright, because this form of image mapping is tricky, and you have to really work hard at it. Alright, I'll see you in part 2 of this lesson.